Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
And it's Tuesday. That means Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower is with us. He's with us on the line this morning. Good morning, Dr. Ostrower.
Oh, hello there, Brian. How are you doing?
Doing well, and yourself?
Well, I'm doing pretty well, too. We're in final exams here at Alfred University, so I got myself a lot of papers on my desk to grade.
Wow, I imagine so. Dr. Ostrower, your thoughts on the news, not quite breaking news, but some news yesterday and the day before on the Mueller investigation.
Well, the Mueller investigation is going to remain news, or in some ways it's going to not remain news for a long time. And it's not going to remain news because Robert Mueller is, and you've heard me say this before on this program, he is a man of integrity. And he is not going to play out this whole drama in the press. There have been virtually no leaks at all from the investigation, and that has a lot to do with Mueller's own, with his leadership. This guy has been around for a long time, and he knows the score. I don't understand, and I kind of understand, I guess, why there's a good deal of skepticism about Robert Mueller, and it's because one of the cable news networks has been denigrating him, has been trying to delegitimize the investigation. And also, of course, because the president has said again and again and again that the investigation is a witch hunt, that the investigation, the charges of collusion are a fraud, that they are a hoax, and so forth. And, you know, there was a German propagandist way back in the 1930s who very, very famously said, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it. And I think that, you know, there are at least 35% of the American public who's believing President Trump in respect to Robert Mueller. But Mueller, as I say, is a professional. He's been around. He is a man of integrity. Mueller began his career, well, I don't even know whether you'd call it beginning his career. You know, he was born in the Philadelphia area, like Trump, born in the New York area. They were both born to relatively wealthy families. They both went to private schools. In many ways, they had a somewhat similar upbringing, but they went in very different directions. In the final analysis, Donald Trump sought out, if you will, private profit. And Mueller went in a different direction. He sought out public service. At Princeton University, during the anti-war demonstrations, the anti-war period of the 1960s, he was largely unfazed by that. When he graduated, he went into the Marines. He had to wait about a year because of some athletic injuries that he had suffered. But eventually he went into the Marines, and he served very, very honorably for approximately a year when he was in Vietnam. And I might add, by the way, that when he was in Vietnam, he was a second lieutenant. He was many of the men in his company who had been there for quite a while were very skeptical of this young guy taking over in an area of Vietnam. This is near what we call the DMZ, the demilitarized zone in the northern part of South Vietnam. They were very skeptical of him. They didn't know how gung-ho he was. They didn't know whether he would put them into vulnerable positions. But he proved his worth. He proved that he was a man of trust. They did come to trust him and have a great deal of confidence in him, and they continue to say that to this very, very day. He was at one point went to retrieve 2 wounded of his soldiers. It was a very dangerous situation. He was himself seriously wounded when a bullet went right through his thigh. But after recovering, he went back to Vietnam, and he served, as I say, very honorably. He received a Bronze Star. He received a purple. What do you call it? A purple heart. He was a man of integrity, and he went from there eventually to law school at the University of Virginia. And after he got out of Virginia, he went into the Justice Department. And then when he was in the Justice Department, he dealt with some very, very tricky things. The John Gotti investigation. He investigated the Lockerbie, the murder, really, of 260 or so Americans on a aircraft in Scotland that was downed by terrorists from Libya. The man had won his stripes, and from there he was eventually appointed by George W. Bush to become the head of the FBI. And there, too, he served in a very distinguished way, including, of course, involvement in the investigation of 9/11. So I guess what I'm saying boils down to the fact that, in contrast to certain people, he really devoted his life to public service, and he did it in a way that is largely above criticism. And that's why I find the degree to which he is being denigrated, the degree to which he is being unfairly criticized by the current administration for political reasons, I find that to be very sad, and I find even sadder the degree to which so many people seem to buy the president's arguments against Mueller.
You said it was about 35% of the people that support the president. Had you seen any polls on that, Dr. Ostrower?
Well, the polls differ to a certain extent. I think that, his real base of support is about 35%. There was a CNN poll very recently, I think maybe as recently as yesterday, that, questioned to what extent do people find his handling of this whole of an investigation credible. And I believe that the number is now down to about 29% of all Americans who are supporting the president on that. Now those numbers have declined from, I think, initially around 38%, 35%, and now it's down to about 29%. And I find what's also interesting, if this poll can be believed, is that the number of Republicans who are admiring of the president's handling of this investigation is down considerably, from approximately 65% to now about 51%. The Democrats, obviously not very many of them supporting the president on this. Independents have fallen about 4 or 5 or 6%. So, the president's support is eroding. And I think that, that has something to do with the degree to which, his dishonesty is catching up with him. I mean, when he says, for instance, that the White House is a well-oiled machine, that everyone in the White House is enthusiastic about the administration, and then we find people who are unwilling to even join the administration, even in top-level jobs, such as the chief of staff, I think it undermines the president's credibility.
Couple surprises for Trump and Trump supporters recently. Tucker Carlson gave an interview to a Swiss media outlet and told the media outlet from Switzerland that the president is not focused and knows very little about the legislative process. The other big surprise was yesterday, Brett Kavanaugh sided with the liberals on the Supreme Court on a Planned Parenthood ruling. Your thoughts there?
Well, let me talk about the Planned Parenthood first. The issue here, and again, I don't know to what extent our listeners have followed this, is that certain states have said that they will challenge federal regulations in respect to Planned Parenthood. Other states have said exactly the opposite. And when you have two states that come out on opposite sides of an issue, the subject goes to courts. It went to a district court, and then went to Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals, if I'm not mistaken, again, I may be wrong on this, but I think it was in Louisiana, sided with the administration against Planned Parenthood. Whereas Court of Appeals in certain other states, possibly in California, I think probably in New Jersey, sided exactly the other way. Well, when you get circuit courts, that's the second highest court in the country, when you get second courts disagreeing, then there's only one way to solve the issue, and that's going to be the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court said here was that by a 6-3 vote, not a 5-4 vote, but by a 6-3 vote, is that we're going to allow the current situation to remain intact. States will disagree over this, and the Supreme Court is not going to step into it. In other words, the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. And Brett Kavanaugh, but also the Chief Justice, John Roberts, sided with the liberals on the court in this decision. Now, why is this, okay? Well, it's possible that for Kavanaugh, it's his way of kind of underscoring the degree to which, in spite of everything that happened during his nomination hearing, he's going to be independent. But it could also be on principle, he sides with the liberals on this one. For the Chief Justice, Again, I don't know his reasoning. I did not read the actual opinion that he wrote, if he did in fact write an opinion at all. But my hunch is that the Chief Justice, more than anything else, wants to preserve the integrity of the court. He wants to preserve, in other words, the degree to which the court remains an independent institution within the American constitutional system. And what that means is that he's not going to allow the court to get involved in highly political kinds of issues. And there's history to that, going all the way back to the 1850s, where the court has sought to avoid involvement in highly contentious issues. I think that's probably what Roberts is doing. It may also be what Kavanaugh is doing, but in any case, it means that you have a 6-3 majority on the court right now, not willing to say the federal government is going to side against Planned Parenthood.
Talking with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, this day in history, and other topics. Stay with us.
AM 1480 WLEA has news, talk, and sports. Local and national. AM 1480 WLEA is doing Hornell.
And that should do it right there for Hornell.
And for Canisteo Greenwood.
The Canisteo Greenwood Redskins.
And
Coming soon.
Coming real soon.
we're adding Westwood 1 NCAA basketball to our regular lineup of local games. And that'll include the March Madness games too.
Is anyone up for a game of basketball?
News, talk, local, and national sports. AM 1480 WLEA.
And now checking in with meteorologist Rob Carolyn. Hey, Rob, going to be cloudy for a while?
Yes, indeed, Brian. Finding the sun is going to be a difficult prospect in the southern tier the next couple of days. If you're looking for lots of sunshine, head east, young man. It's sunny this morning in Albany, Glens Falls, all the way down to Kingston and then into the city and across Long Island. But boy, we've got extensive cloudiness right now from Saranac Lake down through the Binghamton area, all the way out to Pittsburgh, and then into, it looks like western West Virginia right now. Clouds, they'll hold tight. They're trapped underneath high pressure. Temperatures today up to about 35 to 40. Sun actually came up this morning at 7:30. It'll set tonight at 4:38. Now for tonight, we'll have lots of clouds. Could see a flurry or two overnight. We're 25. The cloudiness will persist into tomorrow. Woohoo! See? Mother Nature knows. She's telling us. Watch for a flurry or two tomorrow, 35 to 40. Outlook for tomorrow night, a few flurries possible, 25. And it's mostly cloudy on Thursday. Highs, Brian, 35 to 40. Milder, though, for the weekend.
And we're back with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand says she's still very interested in running for president. Numerous media outlets have went public with information given to them from big Democrat donors who say that they're angry with Gillibrand because they feel that Senator Gillibrand threw Senator Al Franken, the Wisconsin Democrat, under the bus and didn't give him enough time to defend himself on the sexual harassment allegations against him. Your thoughts on Gillibrand going up against the likes of George Soros and being able to win?
Well, I don't know about going up against the likes of George Soros. I mean, George...
Maybe I didn't phrase that right. He's pretty much was the first big Democrat donor who went public against Senator Gillibrand. Gillibrand, without the donors, can she win? Maybe I should say it like that.
No.
Okay.
She can't win. I think that the likelihood of her becoming the Democratic nominee is about, perhaps 1 in 1,000. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe it's 1 in 10,000. But she's not going to become the Democratic nominee. I think that, she has her own critics within the party, as you have just indicated. Her record as a Democrat is, kind of traditional at this point. But, nothing of, she's not a heavyweight. If you're looking for a Democrat who might have a reasonable chance of becoming the candidate in 2020, I think you have to look at someone like Sherrod Brown, who is the Ohio the Ohio senator, who comes from, he comes from, what is essentially a red state, but he's been very, very successful. He's clearly connected, especially on economic issues, not issues of sexual identity, not issues of, that sort of thing, social issues. He's connected with a working class population. He's very, very popular. He won in a red state that Trump had easily won it back in 2016, and as a matter of fact, quite a number of other Republicans won in Ohio this year, but Sherrod Brown won his own election. So I think that he's a very, very serious candidate if he wants to get into the race. And the other guy is, this so-called dark horse, this fellow from Texas, Beto O'Rourke. He lost an election, He lost an election against Senator Ted Cruz, but where, once again, Trump had won by around 20 points in Texas in 2016, and Cruz, the last time that he ran 6 years ago, won, but very, very easily. Beto O'Rourke almost won the election. He lost by about 2 percentage points. He's a very, very attractive candidate. He's very articulate. He has some good experience. He was in the House of Representatives, if I'm not mistaken, for about 3 terms. So, if you lose an election, can you win the presidency? The answer is yeah, it's possible to do that. And I think that there's some history there, not the least of which was George H.W. Bush, who lost also an election for the Senate in Texas and eventually became president of the United States. It really didn't hurt him at all.
How about senators like Kamala Harris or Cory Booker?
Well, I don't know. At this point, I suppose anything's possible. We're still 2 years away from the election. We're 1 year away from a campaign. Look, some of this is going to depend on how well they are organized. We say in real estate that the key is location, location, location. In politics, it's organization, organization, and organization. And while there may be occasionally an exception to that, and I think that Donald Trump's victory was an exception to that, the fact of the matter is that 95% of the time, if you have a good organization, you got a chance. And at this point, honestly, you're going to have to ask Dr. Heinemann about this. I simply don't know how well these folks are organized, and I don't know how much money they're willing to put into their campaign. But, a year from now, if you ask me, I'll give you perhaps a somewhat more intelligent answer.
Can we do a quick This Day in History?
You bet.
This Day in History, and I'm on the History Channel's website as usual. Edward VIII abdicates the throne, the first British monarch to do so, after the British government, the public, and the Church of England condemned his decision to marry American divorcee Wallace Warfield Simpson. He went on the radio and talked about it, and his younger brother, the Duke of York, became George VI. Your thoughts and your memories and your history on that, Dr. Ostrower?
Carried away. I'm old, but I'm not that old. I certainly wasn't born, back in that period. But yeah, it was the first time that a British monarch had ever resigned. It's, I think, a very, very good thing for all of us that he did, because he was essentially a Nazi sympathizer. He was very, very much involved in what we call the appeasement movement, that is to say, appeasing, cooperating, if you will, with Hitler and with Mussolini back during the 1930s. I think he would have made a dreadful, dreadful king. However, what's I think also interesting about this is that while public opinion was, to a significant extent against him, and certainly the Parliament was almost unanimously against him, and that's one of the reasons why he winds up resigning. I say almost, but not completely. And one of the people who supported him was Winston Churchill. Okay, and Churchill is going to lose a certain amount of good old-fashioned credibility because he stood with the king. And yet, 2 years later, really 3 years later, in May of 1940, even Churchill, because of the dramatic developments in World War II, especially a very, very serious British defeat in Norway against the German Navy, well, not just the German Navy, but some of the German Army, well, how shall I put it? Churchill became the alternative to the then existing prime minister, who really was in many ways very, very ineffective, certainly ineffective as a war leader, and people thought of Churchill as, in spite of what had happened with Edward VIII, they saw him as a leader. They saw him as someone who's willing to speak his mind. They saw him as someone who's an individualist, and they saw him as someone who is willing to shore up the, how shall I put it, the morale of the British public, and he did that brilliantly.
Is there maybe a slight similarity between the situation with Edward VIII, not a big comparison, but a slight similarity between Edward VIII and Princess Diana separating and divorcing from Prince Charles?
I'm not sure I know where you're going on that one. Charles and Diana had a toxic relationship. It was not a very, very good marriage. And I don't think that really is a terribly similar, other than this. And I think that you're onto something here. No one had ever, in Great Britain, the idea of divorce was considered, much less divorce to marry an American, and not just an American, but an American commoner. That was simply, unheard of. Okay, you just didn't do that kind of thing, and it cost Edward VIII his monarchy. But with Diana, by that time, divorce was becoming a little bit more acceptable, and women were having, if you will, given greater agency, given greater, opportunities to express their own wants and their own needs and their own values and whatnot. In that sense, I think that it's not so much a similarity, but I think a difference between what happened with Edward VIII on one hand and what happened during the 1980s with Diana.
And we're down to about 60 seconds, but we can stretch it out a little bit more if you want to go a little bit longer, Dr. Ostrower. Prince Charles, just reading on the UK The Week, says he's been the first in line to the throne for 65 years, longer than any other heir in UK history. And your thoughts on the delay there?
Well, yeah, he was longer than anyone else. We happen to live longer these days than we did back in the 1930s or in the 1830s and so forth. And Queen Elizabeth is taking full advantage of that. So I guess that Prince Charles is just going to have to remain somewhat patient. Who knows for how much longer. But and it's not even certain that he will become the next king upon the death of his mother. He may simply say, because of his own age, I think he's about 70 years old, that he will pass this up in favor of one of his sons. By the same token, I think what's happening in Great Britain has a lot more to do with things beyond the monarchy at this point. And I'm talking about Brexit. Britain is in a mess, and no one knows at this point what's going to happen. We do not know whether there is going to be a vote in Parliament or not. We do not know whether there's going to be economic chaos in Great Britain, although one might note right now that the pound is, I don't want to say it's in free fall, but it's in real trouble because the economy is in trouble, and the economy is in trouble because of the whole issue of Brexit. And by the same token, we don't know how the Europeans are going to react to what the British are doing. We don't know whether Great Britain is going to remain a part of the United Kingdom, because if the British leave not the common market, but if they leave the European Union, it's entirely possible, I think it's quite plausible, that Scotland will peel off independently and that Northern Ireland is going to peel off independently. So I think that the real issues for Great Britain are probably the most serious that they have been in, I was going to say, and maybe in its history, well, I would say at least going back to the 1940s and the attack by Nazi Germany against Great Britain.
Dr. Ostrower, as always, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me here, and I'll talk to you guys next week.